In a room full of power and privilege, where every word carries weight and every glance hides judgment, one man stands at the edge of silence and revelation. He carries the burden of a dream bigger than the walls that try to confine him. But beneath the surface, the room laughs, not at his ideas, but at who he is. What happens when the world refuses to see your worth, dismissing your presence with subtle cruelty and outright disdain? This is the story of resilience against the odds, a journey through humiliation to a shocking turn that no one saw coming. Watch closely as the truth unfolds and the tables turn in ways that will challenge everything you think you know. If you believe in stories that expose injustice and celebrate triumph, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Where are you watching from? Your voice matters as we dive into this unforgettable tale. Langston Corbin entered the sleek glass boardroom with his head high, leather portfolio tucked under one arm, suit perfectly tailored to project an air of quiet authority. But the second he stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop. Conversations fell into hushed, conspiratorial snickers. He heard one low voice behind him. Maybe the janitor's here to give a TED Talk. Another laugh echoed off the polished black table that stretched 20 feet in front of him. He swallowed hard and forced himself not to react. This was the most important presentation of his life. 6 months of work, 70-hour weeks, thousands of pages of research distilled into 20 slides. He was about to deliver the strategy that could make Sterling and Hawk a global powerhouse. Instead, they acted like he was an inconvenience. He connected his laptop to the projector, the Sterling and Hawk logo blazing across the massive screen. He adjusted his tie, fingers trembling just a little, hoping no one noticed. "Good morning," he began, voice firm. "Today I'll be presenting our Global Expansion Initiative, which is projected to increase our market share in Southeast Asia, Western Europe, and South America over the next 5 years by over 30%. Prescott Hawk, the CFO, let out a loud, exaggerated sigh and leaned back in his chair. "Langston, buddy, we've got actual business to discuss today. Can you keep this to the cliff notes?" A ripple of snide laughter spread around the table. Camille Delaney, Director of Strategy, didn't even bother to look up from her phone, scrolling absently with one manicured finger. Langston's jaw tensed. He clicked to the first slide, a heat map of target regions with projected ROI overlays. This plan leverages local partnerships and logistics infrastructure improvements. Phase 1 alone is designed to secure over $600 million in new annual revenue by year 2. Evercole, head of operations, let out a low whistle. "Wow. Did you run that by your Uber driver on the way here?" The entire room roared with laughter. Langston tried to speak over it, voice cracking. "These numbers come from verified sources, including PricewaterhouseCoopers and our internal analytics." "Our analytics?" Camille finally raised her eyes, narrowing them. "Funny. I don't remember authorizing you to waste company resources on your hobby project." Everett slammed a hand on the table for emphasis. "She got you there." More laughter, harder this time, crueler. Langston felt heat crawling up his neck. He cleared his throat, the words dry in his mouth. "I conducted the research using discretionary hours allocated to project development. There was no additional budget strain." Camille waved him off. "So it's unpaid homework." "Got it." More laughter. Someone near the back coughed the words, "Affirmative Action Showcase." Langston heard that, even over the snickering. He clicked to the next slide, voice shaking. "If you'll allow me to continue, the financing plan is based on staggered debt instruments negotiated at historically low interest rates," which Prescott interrupted, raising both hands like a traffic cop. "Langston, for the love of God, $200 million in debt financing? What are you smoking? We wouldn't trust you with $200 for the coffee fund." The room howled. Langston's vision blurred at the edges. He wiped his brow with his sleeve, the sweat clammy. He tried to keep reading, the words on the screen swimming. Everett leaned forward with a shark's grin. "You want us to just Venmo you the 200 mil? He made a show of pulling out his phone, squinting. "Wait, what's your handle again?" The table erupted. Langston pressed his lips together so hard they hurt. He felt the remote shaking in his hand. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Son, you'll have to be twice as good for half the credit." He swallowed it down. Tried again. "This strategy reduces long-term operational costs by 18% through." Camille snorted. "Jesus. Prescott, please tell me you're recording this. This is comedy gold." She turned her phone toward him and snapped a picture without asking. "For HR, right? Just so they know he tried." Langston's throat closed. He tried to inhale, but it was like breathing through wet cement. The HR director spoke up finally, sounding exhausted. "Langston, we appreciate the enthusiasm, but I think we're good here. Maybe email the deck to marketing so they can put some rainbows on it." More cruel laughter. Langston returned to his small, dimly lit office, the sharp scent of polished mahogany and stale coffee mingling in the air like the memories of the morning's humiliation. He closed the door softly, but the echoes of laughter from the boardroom haunted the silence. The phone rang once, twice, then a third time before he finally answered. It was his assistant, nervous and hesitant, delivering the latest internal email. "Leadership has decided to delay the rollout of your global strategy, pending further review." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Langston sat heavily in his chair, rubbing his temples, as images of the boardroom played again in his mind. Determined to salvage what he could, he began drafting an updated proposal, adding more data, more contingency plans, trying to anticipate every doubt they might have. But every time he looked at the screen, the mocking faces of Prescott, Camille, and Everett stared back at him. The next day, Langston was called to a feedback session with Prescott and Camille in a glass-walled conference room. The atmosphere was sterile but cold, a calculated chill. Prescott didn't beat around the bush. "Langston, your enthusiasm is admirable, but frankly, your plan is a bit naive. Global expansion is a beast. You're playing in the big leagues now." Camille nodded, her smile tight and condescending. "Your numbers are overly optimistic. We can't have the company's future riding on pipe dreams. Stick to local projects for now." Langston tried to interject, to explain the rigor behind his analysis, but Camille held up her hand. "No offense, but sometimes it's better to know your limits." Everett, who had slipped in halfway through, chimed in with a grin. "Besides, your last initiative cost us a small fortune in wasted resources. We can't afford another round of creative thinking." The implication was clear. Langston was a liability. His voice caught in his throat as he struggled to defend months of work against their casual dismissal. Prescott smirked. "Look, we're not here to crush your spirit. We just want to protect the company." Langston wanted to scream that he was protecting the company by thinking big, by innovating, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he nodded silently, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. Walking out, he passed colleagues who avoided his gaze, their pity thinly veiled and suffocating. He was alone in a crowd that didn't believe in him. Over the following weeks, Langston noticed subtle but deliberate roadblocks, delayed approvals, meetings rescheduled without notice, budgets trimmed drastically. His emails went unanswered. His calls were forwarded to voicemail. At every turn, someone undermined his efforts, sabotaging the very project that could define his career. The final straw came during a staff meeting, when an intern interrupted him mid-sentence with a snide. "Are you sure this isn't another one of those ambitious ideas that'll never get off the ground?" The room erupted in nervous laughter. Langston's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. His mind raced. How much more could he take? Yet, he knew walking away wasn't an option. Every setback felt like a punch to his confidence, but also a reminder that the fight was far from over. The crushing weight of doubt pressed down, threatening to suffocate his dreams, but deep inside, a quiet fire burned. He would endure. He had to. Langston Corbin's days blurred into a haze of relentless obstacles and thinly veiled contempt as the hostility of the boardroom seeped deeper into every corner of Sterling and Hawk. After weeks of quiet battles over budget cuts and delayed approvals, the atmosphere thickened one afternoon during a routine strategy meeting in the executive suite. Langston entered the room carrying his usual stack of reports, hoping that today might finally bring some semblance of progress. Instead, the moment he spoke, the room shifted. Prescott Hawk, seated at the head of the table, barely concealed a sneer. "Langston, why don't you sit down and let the grown-ups talk for a while? Maybe you can take some notes for once." A stifled chuckle echoed from Camille Delaney, who rested her chin on her hand, eyes narrowed with thinly veiled disdain. Everett Cole folded his arms, a slow, mocking smile curling his lips as he added, "Yeah, we get it. Big plans, big dreams. But maybe it's time to focus on what's real." Langston felt the heat rise in his chest, a familiar sting of humiliation that had become all too routine. He swallowed hard, summoning every ounce of composure. "With all due respect, these plans are critical to our growth. We've seen stagnation for too long." Prescott cut him off sharply. "Critical? More like delusional. You keep talking about growth, but what you really mean is throwing money down a rabbit hole." Camille leaned forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper audible only to Langston. "You know, it's cute how determined you are, considering your track record." The room grew tense as she let the words hang in the air before continuing. "But sometimes, determination isn't enough. Maybe if you spent more time learning the culture here, less time chasing pipe dreams, you'd last longer." The implication was unmistakable. Langston's place was not at the table with them. It was somewhere beneath it. Everett nodded, smirking. "Culture is important, Langston. You don't get to rewrite the rules because you're the new guy." The words weren't just dismissive, they were a declaration that he was an outsider, unwelcome and unworthy. Langston's hands clenched the edges of his chair as his voice remained steady, though every word cost him. "I'm not here to rewrite the rules. I'm here to help us win. The market is changing. Our competitors are evolving. If we don't adapt, we risk everything." Prescott's laughter cut him down again. "Risk? That's a rich word coming from someone who can't even keep a team together." Camille smirked, crossing her arms. "You should have seen the last project you led. Employees leaving in droves, partners pulling out. We can't afford more of your help." The boardroom had transformed into an arena of personal attacks masked as business critiques. Langston felt his chest tighten, the walls closing in around him. He wanted to remind them of the months he'd poured into building relationships, the late nights he'd sacrificed with his family, the careful analyses behind every figure he presented. But their eyes were already sliding over him like he was invisible, waiting for his silence to confirm their verdict. He bit back the rising bitterness and managed, "I'm committed to this company's success, and I believe in this strategy. I'm open to constructive feedback, but I won't accept disrespect." Prescott's smile darkened. "Respect is earned, Langston, and you're running out of credit." Camille added, "Maybe it's time you reevaluate whether this is the right place for you." The room's cold dismissal crushed him more than any blunt insult. He knew they wanted him gone, but resignation wasn't an option yet. Instead, he nodded slowly, forcing himself to stay. As the meeting disbanded, Langston felt the weight of whispered conversations and sidelong glances trail behind him like shadows. His inbox filled with vague messages from colleagues offering advice on fitting in or managing expectations. Each note was a reminder that no matter how hard he worked, the personal judgments and biases were deeply rooted and relentless. That evening, sitting alone in his apartment, Langston stared at the blinking cursor on a blank document. He longed to write a letter, an impassioned plea or a fierce rebuttal, but exhaustion and doubt anchored his fingers. The attacks had shifted from professional skepticism to cutting personal barbs, designed not just to question his ideas, but to break his spirit. Yet beneath the hurt, a fragile resolve kindled. He reminded himself that every giant before him had faced a crucible of doubt and derision. This was his test, harsh and unforgiving as it was. Langston drafted a plan to rebuild, starting with finding allies, documenting every slight and obstruction, and preparing for the moment when his strategy would no longer be ignored. But the scars of this stage, the personal insults and deliberate undermining, left him bruised and weary, a man caught between ambition and the corrosive weight of exclusion. Langston Corbin stepped into the sprawling executive suite, his every step heavier than the last. The previous meetings had left invisible wounds, but today's gathering promised a new kind of torment. one that stripped away not just his ideas, but his very dignity. The boardroom was larger this time, its walls lined with sleek monitors and expensive abstract art. The air conditioning hummed with clinical coldness as he took his seat at the end of the polished table, surrounded by the same faces that had dismissed and ridiculed him before. Prescott Hawk was already speaking, his tone calm but razor-sharp. "Langston, we appreciate your efforts, but frankly, your recent conduct has raised concerns. We need to talk about professionalism." Langston's eyes narrowed. Conduct? He'd sat through humiliation after humiliation without complaint. Prescott continued, "We expect all executives to uphold the highest standards. That means respecting company culture, the chain of command, and most importantly, the sensibilities of your colleagues." Camille Delaney leaned forward, her expression thinly veiled contempt. "To put it bluntly, Langston, there have been reports that your behavior in meetings is disruptive, even disrespectful." The words hung in the room like a noose tightening. Langston opened his mouth to ask for specifics, but Prescott cut him off. "We've heard about your outbursts, your inflexibility, and frankly, your refusal to listen. That's not the leadership we need." Everett Cole smirked and added, "And let's not forget how you stormed out of last week's strategy session without explanation. Not exactly the mark of a team player." Langston's throat tightened. Every accusation was a blade, yet none were grounded in truth, except, perhaps, in their twisted interpretations. He had been firm, yes, but never disrespectful. He had challenged bad ideas because he believed the company's future was at stake. But here, firmness was recast as insubordination, conviction as obstinance. The meeting devolved further as Prescott's tone grew icy. "There have been instances where you have publicly questioned decisions made by senior management in front of staff. This undermines authority and sows discord." Langston's pulse raced. He wanted to remind them that the future of the company depended on innovation and fearless debate. Instead, he swallowed hard and forced calm. "I have always acted in the company's best interest. I welcome healthy discussion, but I do not believe in blind compliance." Prescott's eyes glittered with disdain. "That's precisely the problem. We need leaders who support the vision and direction set forth by the board, not individuals who challenge it at every turn." Camille chimed in, voice syrupy but venomous. "Langston, there's a difference between constructive dialogue and public insubordination. You've crossed that line multiple times." The room's collective gaze felt like a tribunal passing sentence. Langston's fists clenched beneath the table. He fought the urge to stand and defend himself, but knew it would only confirm their narrative of a volatile executive. Instead, he bit back the words swirling in his mind and nodded silently. After the meeting adjourned, he was left alone in the empty boardroom, the silence heavy and suffocating. He stared at the gleaming table, imagining it as a mirror reflecting the fractured image of a man battered by relentless scrutiny and dehumanizing disrespect. Outside the glass walls, whispers followed him down the corridor. Stories distorted by bias and gossip painted him as difficult, arrogant, and out of place. Each whispered judgment chipped away at his professional identity, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Back in his office, Langston sat motionless, replaying the encounter. He was exhausted, but not defeated. He knew this was a test, not just of his ideas, but of his resilience. Somewhere beneath the crushing weight of alienation, a spark of determination glowed. He resolved to document every slight, to gather allies, and to prepare for a reckoning that would expose the truth behind the facade of power and prejudice. Yet the cost was steep. The dehumanizing attacks hollowed his spirit, making every day a battle against invisibility and contempt. Still, Langston Corbin refused to disappear. He would rise through this crucible or be consumed by it. Langston Corbin's world continued to shrink under the weight of relentless disdain and calculated exclusion. Each day at Sterling and Hawk felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of derision, and the boardroom had transformed into a gauntlet where his every move was scrutinized and mocked. One afternoon, he was summoned to what was presented as a collaborative session on refining the global strategy, but from the moment he entered the room, He sensed the true nature of the gathering. Prescott Hawk sat at the head of the table with a tight, knowing smile, joined by Camille Delaney and Everett Cole, their faces a mask of thinly veiled cruelty. "Langston," Prescott began, voice dripping with feigned sympathy, "we wanted to give you some feedback on your latest presentation." Langston nodded cautiously, heart pounding. "I'm here to listen." Camille leaned forward, her eyes glinting with mockery. "You should know we've taken note of the enthusiasm, but sometimes enthusiasm without finesse is just noise." Everett smirked, folding his arms. "Especially when it's misplaced." Prescott gestured toward a large screen that flickered to life, displaying a series of slides purporting to highlight areas of concern in Langston's plan. But the focus quickly shifted from strategic shortcomings to personal attacks. The first slide read, "Communication style, overbearing and ineffective." Camille's voice rang out. "Langston tends to dominate discussions, often dismissing colleagues' input outright." Langston's jaw tightened. He knew this was a gross mischaracterization, but their goal was clear, to paint him as disruptive. Prescott clicked to the next slide. "Team morale, reported as low." Everett chuckled. "Several team members have expressed discomfort with Langston's management approach, citing a lack of collaboration." Langston fought the urge to protest. He had spent months trying to build bridges, to rally support for his vision. Yet here he was being blamed for alienating the very people he sought to unite. Then came the most humiliating moment. Prescott turned to the side and motioned for a junior executive to approach. The young man wheeled in a cart holding a small, wrapped box. "We thought a little token might help Langston," Prescott said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Camille took the box, unwrapped it slowly, revealing a novelty participation trophy with a golden star. She held it up, voice dripping with sarcasm, for outstanding effort in trying. The room burst into laughter, harsh and cruel. Langston's face burned with shame. His hands trembled, but he forced himself not to react outwardly. He swallowed the lump rising in his throat, the cold sting of tears threatening. He wanted to storm out, to scream that he was not a joke, that his ideas were worth more than their contempt. But he sat, silent and small under their merciless gaze. Prescott's voice cut through the laughter. "We believe it's important to keep morale high, even when tough lessons are needed." Everett leaned forward, smirking. "Consider this a reminder that you're not yet part of the inner circle." The words echoed like a verdict, sealing Langston's outsider status. The meeting ended with a chorus of derisive applause. Langston rose slowly, the trophy feeling like a weight in his hands, a symbol not of achievement, but of ridicule. As he left the room, whispers and chuckles followed him down the hallway, a soundtrack of scorn that seemed to close in from all sides. That evening, alone in his apartment, Langston stared at the trophy, its plastic gleam mocking him. Yet beneath the humiliation, a stubborn ember of resolve flickered. He vowed this was not the end. The path ahead was steep and fraught with pain, but he would rise. For every moment of public humiliation, he would fight back with unwavering strength and purpose. At the office, he found his emails unanswered, his calendar increasingly void of meetings, and whispers swirling behind closed doors. The silent war against him was no longer subtle. It had become an orchestrated campaign to erase his presence. The final blow came when a terse email arrived from Prescott Hawk, blunt and cold. "Effective immediately. You are to cease all direct communications regarding the Global Strategy Project. Further instructions will follow." Langston stared at the message, disbelief mingling with a deep, hollow ache. His role as the visionary for Sterling and Hawk's future had been quietly stripped away, without explanation or discussion. He tried to request a meeting to clarify, to plead his case, but those requests were dismissed or ignored. His phone calls to key collaborators went unanswered. The office that had once buzzed with possibility now felt like a mausoleum, its halls echoing with absence. One afternoon, Langston was summoned to the CEO's office under the guise of a progress update. As he entered, the room's cold sterility hit him. The stark white walls, the absence of personal touches, and the heavy, expectant silence. Prescott sat behind a massive desk, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. "Langston," Prescott began, voice measured but firm, "we've reviewed your recent conduct and proposals. After careful consideration, the board has decided to place your global strategy initiative on indefinite hold." Langston's heart sank, but he pressed on. "With all due respect, this project is vital to our survival. The market is shifting rapidly. Delays risk obsolescence." Prescott's gaze didn't waver. "That's noted, but the company's priorities have shifted. We need to focus on consolidating current operations before any expansion." Langston fought the urge to argue, but knew it was futile. "So what am I to do?" Prescott's lips curled slightly. "You'll be reassigned to oversee regional operations for the Northeast Division, effective immediately." The words felt like a sentence, banishing him from the arena where his ideas had been forged. Langston nodded slowly, masking the devastation beneath a veneer of professionalism. As he left the office, whispers filled the corridor, speculation about his demotion, rumors about his difficult temperament, and murmurs that his ideas were too radical. Each word chipped away at his reputation. His reassignment was not just a job change. It was an exile from the vision he had fought to bring to life. Back at his new desk in a cramped, windowless office miles away from the executive suite, Langston wrestled with the bitter reality of attempted erasure. His emails no longer carried the same weight. His voice was drowned out in meetings he no longer led. Yet, even in this forced isolation, his resolve did not waver. He began documenting every obstruction, every slight, every whispered lie, building a dossier that he hoped would one day expose the truth behind his downfall. Outside the office, the company moved forward, but without Langston's vision guiding its steps. The cracks he had seen widening only grew deeper, threatening to swallow the very empire Sterling and Hawk had built. Late into the nights, Langston pored over reports, financials, and market data, preparing for the day he would reclaim his place. Though sidelined and silenced, he remained a storm gathering strength. The battle had grown more treacherous, but so had his determination. Langston Corbin sat alone in his modest apartment late at night, the city lights casting long shadows through the window, a stark contrast to the bright corporate towers that once held his ambitions. The weight of weeks of rejection and humiliation pressed heavily on his shoulders, but beneath the exhaustion, something more potent stirred, a quiet resolve born from every slight, every cold dismissal he'd endured. His gaze rested on the participation trophy tucked away in a corner of a shelf, its plastic gleam now a symbol of the battle he was waging far beyond the boardrooms. That evening, Langston made a call that would shift the tide of his entire journey. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke into the phone. "Proceed with the $3.6 billion authorization for Project Atlas." On the other end, a voice crackled with urgency and excitement. "Mr. Corbin, the funds have cleared. All necessary stakeholders have signed off. This is unprecedented." Langston closed his eyes briefly, feeling a surge of vindication. While Sterling and Hawk's board had sought to erase him, he had quietly secured the backing to launch a multinational venture that would eclipse his former company. Weeks prior, he had been meticulous in assembling a coalition of investors, international partners, and advisors, many of whom had grown disillusioned with Sterling and Hawk's old guard and eager for new leadership that embraced innovation and inclusion. Now, as the call ended, Langston allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The journey ahead would be daunting, but the power to change the game was finally in his hands. He began drafting an email to a select group of trusted colleagues and mentors, outlining the vision for Project Atlas, a global enterprise designed to leverage cutting-edge logistics, sustainable supply chains, and equitable partnerships across continents. His words were measured but inspiring, a stark contrast to the dismissive tones he'd faced before. As dawn approached, Langston felt a renewed sense of purpose. The following morning, he returned to his office, not Sterling and Hawk's ivory tower, but a modest shared workspace where his new team was gathering to plan their launch. The energy was electric. Unlike the cold, hostile boardrooms he'd left behind, this space buzzed with collaboration and respect. each member was valued for their expertise and vision, united by a common goal. Word of Langston's new venture began to ripple through the industry, igniting whispers of disruption and transformation. Back at Sterling and Hawk, those whispers grew louder. Executives who had once jeered now exchanged nervous glances. Prescott Hawk received urgent calls from major investors demanding explanations for the sudden shift in market dynamics. Camille Delaney's confident facade faltered as key partners reconsidered their alliances. Everett Cole faced internal inquiries about the company's strategic failures. Langston, meanwhile, remained focused but composed. He was aware that this was just the beginning of a long battle, not just for market share, but for justice and recognition. He knew the personal cost he'd paid was immense, but the clarity of his purpose was unwavering. His rise was not fueled by vengeance, but by a vision for a better, more inclusive industry. As weeks turned into months, Project Atlas began securing contracts and partnerships that Sterling and Hawk had overlooked or dismissed. Langston's reputation transformed from the outsider to the visionary leader. Invitations arrived for speaking engagements and international forums. Yet, he never forgot the humiliation and alienation that had almost broken him. Those experiences shaped his leadership, grounding it in empathy, resilience, and a fierce commitment to equity. Late one evening, Langston penned a message to his former colleagues, not to gloat, but to challenge. The future belongs to those who embrace change, collaboration, and respect. I hope one day we can all lead together, united by these values. The message was shared quietly, a subtle but powerful reminder of the journey from rejection to redemption. Langston Corbin entered the sleek conference room of his new venture's headquarters with the calm confidence of a man who had endured the worst and was now ready to claim his rightful place. The walls were lined with maps, charts, and digital displays that pulsed with real-time data tracking the progress of Project Atlas. Around the table sat his core leadership team, seasoned professionals, eager visionaries, and allies he had carefully chosen over months of quiet networking. Langston cleared his throat and looked at the faces around him, then addressed the team with a voice steady and commanding. Today marks a milestone not just for Project Atlas, but for the industry as a whole. We are officially launching our multinational operations across 3 continents, backed by $3.6 billion in secured funding, partnerships, and cutting-edge technology. A wave of nods and quiet affirmations swept the room. Langston paused, then continued. But there's more. It's time we acknowledge why we're here and what brought us to this moment. I want to reveal to you, and soon to the world, the story behind Project Atlas and why it matters so deeply. With that, he signaled a staff member who dimmed the lights and started a presentation. The screen filled with footage from the old Sterling and Hawk boardroom, the laughter, the sneers, the humiliations, all captured and narrated with unflinching honesty. "This," Langston said, voice rich with resolve, "is what I endured. The disdain of those who underestimated me not because of my ideas, but because of who I am. They laughed at my vision, dismissed my work, and sought to erase me from the very company I dedicated my life to building." The room was silent except for the steady rhythm of the images unfolding. Langston's team watched with a mixture of anger, sorrow, and understanding. I made one call, a quiet call, and secured backing that these same executives failed to obtain, $3.6 billion that now powers a venture designed to redefine how global commerce works. He turned toward the door where a live video feed was already broadcasting to key media outlets and industry leaders worldwide. This is not just a business. It's a statement, a rebuke of outdated power structures, and a declaration that innovation and inclusion will lead the future. The feed cut live to a press conference where Langston stood before a packed room, the glow of cameras and the murmur of anticipation hanging thick in the air. Journalists asked sharp questions, some skeptical, many curious. Langston answered with clarity and grace, emphasizing the collaboration, transparency, and ethics at the heart of Project Atlas. Back in the conference room, members of his team exchanged glances of pride and hope. This unveiling was more than a business announcement. It was the shattering of old barriers and the creation of a new paradigm. Meanwhile, the ripples of Langston's revelation spread rapidly. At Sterling and Hawk, the news hit like a thunderclap. Prescott Hawk was confronted with investors demanding explanations for the sudden loss of market dominance. Camille Delaney scrambled to contain the fallout, her previous dismissiveness now a glaring liability. Everett Cole faced internal reviews and questions about the culture that had pushed out such a visionary leader. Behind closed doors, Sterling and Hawk's executives grappled with the consequences of their arrogance and cruelty. Public opinion shifted. Press coverage painted the old guard as out of touch and resistant to change. Langston, however, remained focused. He knew the true challenge lay ahead, not in the unveiling, but in sustaining momentum, delivering results, and transforming an industry that had resisted evolution for too long. His journey from humiliation to leadership was a testament to resilience and strategic patience. He had endured every slight, every setback, and used it to fuel a movement far greater than himself. As the presentation ended and the room filled with applause, Langston looked around at the faces illuminated by hope and possibility. He understood that this was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where justice, innovation, and respect reigned. The scars of the past would remain, but they would serve as a foundation for a future built on strength and equality. The fallout from Langston Corbin's public unveiling of Project Atlas and the $3.6 billion backing reverberated swiftly through Sterling and Hawk's corporate halls, shattering the illusion of control Prescott Hawk and his allies once wielded with impunity. Within days, major investors who had long been patient with the company's stagnant leadership demanded urgent meetings, their voices sharp with frustration and betrayal. Langston's revelation had exposed not just his own unjust treatment, but the deeper rot of a company unwilling to evolve, shackled by arrogance and prejudice. Prescott found himself in a series of closed-door meetings where accusations flew and accountability was demanded. His attempts to deflect blame only deepened the cracks in the board's cohesion. Camille Delaney, once so confident in her power, watched helplessly as partnerships she had cultivated began to dissolve under public scrutiny. Clients and collaborators questioned the integrity of Sterling and Hawk's leadership, fearing association with an institution now widely perceived as hostile to innovation and equity. Everett Cole faced internal investigations triggered by employee testimonies describing a toxic work environment. The narrative had shifted. The spotlight was no longer on Langston's supposed failings, but on the systemic failures that had driven him out. The company's stock price plummeted as analysts downgraded their ratings, citing significant governance concerns and strategic misalignment. The board, once a fortress of complacency, became a battleground. Emergency sessions convened to contain the damage, but the momentum of change was relentless. Shareholders voted to remove Prescott from his CFO role, citing a loss of confidence. Camille was asked to resign amidst growing public and internal pressure. Everett was suspended pending the outcome of the investigations. Meanwhile, Langston's Project Atlas soared, gaining traction with new contracts and partnerships that seemed to flow effortlessly in comparison to the bureaucratic inertia of his former company. News outlets hailed Project Atlas as a symbol of change and progress, a new model of leadership grounded in transparency, inclusion, and strategic foresight. Langston's former colleagues faced a reckoning not just in business, but in their personal reputations. Invitations to conferences and boards evaporated, replaced by headlines recounting the company's fall from grace. Langston watched the transformation unfold with a mixture of vindication and solemnity. He understood that justice was neither swift nor simple, but the consequences were necessary. His own journey had been marked by pain and perseverance, and now the old guard was forced to confront the ruin their arrogance had wrought. Beyond corporate shakeups, Sterling and Hawk initiated comprehensive reforms, including mandatory bias and ethics training for all employees, a revamp of leadership selection criteria, and the establishment of a diversity and inclusion council. The company vowed to rebuild its culture from the ground up, learning from the failures that had nearly destroyed it. Yet, even as change began, Langston remained vigilant. He knew that systems resistant to change could relapse into old patterns. His success was a catalyst, but not a guarantee. He continued to lead Project Atlas with the same relentless commitment that had driven him from the shadows into the spotlight. The journey from humiliation to empowerment was complete, but the work to transform an industry and inspire genuine equity was ongoing. Months after the storm of consequences had shaken Sterling and Hawk to its core, the corporate landscape was visibly transformed. The company that had once been a symbol of exclusion and arrogance was now struggling to redefine its identity amidst the ruins left by its former leadership's failures. Yet, amid the shifting tides of power and influence, a profound transformation was quietly taking place, not only within the walls of the corporation, but in the hearts of those who had once cast Langston Corbin aside. Everett Cole, once brash and dismissive, found himself confronting the magnitude of his mistakes. The months following his suspension had been humbling. Stripped of his position and influence, he had no choice but to face the reality of the toxic culture he had helped cultivate. Volunteering at community centers and participating in anti-bias workshops, Everett began a slow, painful journey toward understanding the consequences of his arrogance and prejudice. Camille Delaney, too, grappled with the weight of public scrutiny and personal reflection. Far from the polished boardrooms and exclusive events, she immersed herself in diversity and inclusion training programs, seeking not only to atone for past wrongs, but to become an advocate for genuine change. Her public apology, released through a heartfelt video message, resonated widely. "I failed to see the value in voices different from my own. I am committed to learning, listening, and growing every day." Prescott Hawk, the architect of much of the resistance to Langston's vision, took a different path. Retreating from the public eye, he devoted himself to mentoring young professionals from underrepresented communities, attempting to bridge the gap his leadership had widened. His efforts were met with skepticism, but also a cautious optimism. Amid these personal reckonings, Langston Corbin stood as a beacon of resilience and transformation. His leadership of Project Atlas had not only propelled the venture to new heights, but had also reshaped the industry's understanding of what inclusive, ethical leadership could look like. In a move that surprised many, Langston extended an olive branch to those who had wronged him, not as an act of forgiveness alone, but as a testament to the power of growth and second chances. He invited Camille, Everett, and Prescott to apply for positions within Project Atlas, emphasizing that entry would require sincere commitment to the company's rigorous ethics and leadership development programs. His message was clear: redemption was possible, but it demanded accountability, humility, and a willingness to change. The invitation was met with mixed reactions, some viewing it as magnanimous, others with skepticism. But for those who chose to accept, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just professionally but personally. The reintegration process was demanding. Langston insisted on transparent dialogues, ongoing education, and a culture where mistakes were acknowledged openly and lessons actively learned. Slowly, the former executives found themselves transformed, not overnight, but through persistent effort and reflection. Outside the corporate walls, the story of Sterling and Hawk's fall and rise became a case study in leadership courses and diversity initiatives worldwide. Langston often spoke at conferences, sharing not only the technical details of Project Atlas's success, but the human story of resilience, justice, and the long path to reconciliation. Justice, he would say, is not about punishment alone. It's about creating a future where no one is silenced or dismissed because of who they are. It's about building bridges where walls once stood. For Langston, the journey from humiliation to triumph was never just about him. It was a testament to the potential for transformation within all organizations and individuals willing to confront their biases and commit to equity. In quiet moments, Langston reflected on the lessons learned, the strength found in vulnerability, the courage required to persist, and the grace to forgive without forgetting. His story became a beacon, illuminating the possibility of change in even the darkest places. As Sterling and Hawk slowly rebuilt, their narrative intertwined with Langston's, a cautionary tale turned hopeful parable. The scars remained, but they were no longer wounds that festered in silence. Instead, they became the foundation upon which a more just and inclusive future was constructed. The final message was profound and clear. Arrogance and contempt might rule for a time, but truth, resilience, and justice have the power to reshape destinies. The villain's repentance was not a simple redemption arc, but a meaningful transformation born of confrontation with truth and sincere commitment to betterment. In the end, Langston's victory was not just the success of Project Atlas, but the triumph of integrity and the promise that change, though arduous, is always possible. Langston Corbin stood quietly at the edge of a vast conference hall, the hum of conversation buzzing softly beneath the grand vaulted ceiling. The room was filled with leaders, innovators, and changemakers from around the globe, people who had once seen barriers as unbreakable and systems as immovable. Now they gathered not just to celebrate a business success, but to witness the birth of a new paradigm, one that Langston had helped build from the ashes of humiliation, rejection, and relentless struggle. His journey had been unlike any other, starting from a place where his voice was dismissed, his presence questioned, and his vision mocked. But through sheer will, strategic brilliance, and unwavering integrity, he had turned the tide, securing $3.6 billion in backing to launch Project Atlas, a venture that redefined what leadership, inclusion, and innovation could look like. As Langston took the stage, the crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on the man who embodied resilience. He began by acknowledging the painful past, not to dwell in bitterness, but to highlight the transformative power of truth and accountability. When I first stepped into the corporate world, I was seen through a lens clouded by prejudice and doubt, he said. I was silenced, marginalized, and nearly erased. But every moment of dismissal became fuel for a fire that would not be quenched. The audience, a tapestry of diverse faces, many of whom had faced similar battles, leaned in. Langston's story was no longer just his own. It was theirs, a shared narrative of overcoming systemic injustice through courage and vision. Over the past year, Project Atlas had evolved beyond a business venture into a movement for change. Langston had embedded equity, transparency, and empowerment at every level of the organization. Hiring practices prioritized diversity not as a quota, but as a core value. Training programs emphasized empathy, cultural competence, and accountability, ensuring that the mistakes of the past were neither forgotten nor repeated. His leadership team was a reflection of the world they served, multicultural, multi-experienced, and united by a shared mission. But Langston's impact extended far beyond corporate walls. He had launched initiatives supporting education and entrepreneurship in underserved communities, recognizing that leadership meant lifting others alongside him. He funded scholarships, incubators, and social justice programs, believing that true change required investing in the roots, not just the branches. As the conference progressed, Langston introduced new programs designed to institutionalize change within the industry. These included mentorship pipelines for emerging leaders from marginalized backgrounds, transparent reporting on inclusion metrics, and forums for open dialogue about race, equity, and power dynamics. Sterling and Hawk, the very company that had once tried to erase him, was now undergoing its own transformation. The new leadership embraced openness and reform, holding themselves accountable through public commitments and internal restructuring. Quarterly reports included comprehensive diversity and inclusion audits, while employee-led councils influenced policy and culture at every level. The toxic culture that had propelled Langston out was dismantled piece by piece, replaced with systems that valued respect, collaboration, and integrity. Langston's story had become a staple case study in business schools worldwide, a testament to what leadership could achieve when it was rooted in justice and resilience. Yet, despite his acclaim, Langston remained grounded. He often spoke about the ongoing nature of this work. Change is not a destination but a journey, he reminded audiences. It requires constant vigilance, humility, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. During quieter moments, Langston reflected on the scars left by his trials, the public humiliation, the professional exile, the personal doubts. Those wounds were not just memories of pain, but reminders of the strength it took to endure and grow. They fueled his commitment to ensure no one else would have to suffer in silence. One afternoon, Langston sat with his core leadership team, reviewing the latest progress reports. The metrics showed measurable improvements in employee satisfaction, retention, and diversity across all levels. New partnerships were flourishing, and Project Atlas was pioneering sustainable supply chains that respected both the environment and human dignity. But Langston's eyes focused not on the numbers, but on the faces around the table, the people who believed in this mission and embodied it daily. He spoke quietly but passionately. Our work is far from over. This legacy we're building is not just for us, but for every voice that's ever been ignored, every dream that's been deferred. It's our responsibility to carry this forward. Outside, the company's headquarters buzzed with a renewed energy, a vibrant mix of cultures, ideas, and aspirations. Langston often walked the halls, greeting employees from every background, listening to their stories, and learning from their experiences. He understood that true leadership was a dialogue, not a monologue. His invitation to redemption had extended even to those who had once opposed him. Camille Delaney, Everett Cole, and Prescott Hawk had accepted his challenge to join Project Atlas's leadership development programs. Though their journeys were difficult and ongoing, their sincere efforts to change were testament to the transformative power of accountability and grace. In public forums, Langston spoke openly about the complexity of forgiveness, not as forgetting past wrongs, but as a commitment to building a future where such wrongs could no longer take root. His words resonated deeply. Repentance demands courage. Redemption requires action. Together, they paved the way for true justice. As the evening drew to a close, Langston stepped outside the building, the city skyline shimmering behind him like a constellation of possibilities. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future. His journey had been marked by moments of despair and triumph, but the legacy he envisioned was clear, one where dignity and opportunity were not privileges of the few, but rights of all. He knew the story would inspire many, but it was not just his story. It was a collective narrative of resilience, justice, and hope. Langston Corbin's legacy was more than business success. It was a movement that challenged the status quo, uplifted the marginalized, and redefined leadership for generations to come. The end. Thanks for sticking with this story. If you found Langston's journey powerful and inspiring, please consider liking and subscribing to hear more stories like this. I'd love to know what you think about the plot. Did the twist surprise you? How did the ending make you feel? And where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts and location in the comments below. Your support means a lot and helps bring more impactful stories your way.